Hi, this is Meg Kahn with Vision and Missions Consulting. Today, I want to talk a little bit about test optional. I get a lot of questions about test optional schools and whether or not a particular student should submit their test scores. And so the answer is it depends. It depends on the school. It depends on what they mean by test optional, and then how they use the test in the evaluation process. So first, let's talk about the three different types of test optional schools. Now, keep in mind, I'm only talking about test optional, you have uh, and then you have on either side there's test required and test blind, but I'm just talking about the schools that say they are test optional, which means you can choose to submit your score or choose not to. So the first type of test optional school is the test flexible policy. So what that means is they want to see your test scores. If you took the SAT, they would like to see the score. That said, if you don't have a score, they will understand. Now, look, they have no way of finding who took the SAT and who didn't, or who took the ACT and who didn't. But they prefer to see the SATs. They prefer to see a test score. So where you have test flexible policies, send in the score. And keep in mind, those schools are actually fading out. As we get further away from the pandemic, everyone is able to take a test. So those schools who had more test flexible policies have migrated back to requiring test scores. The second type of test optional are schools where they will consider test scores if you submit them. And typically, with most of these schools, they'll only consider the test scores if it enhances your application. And one thing to keep in mind with that, for a lot of these schools, you will see a correlate. You'll see a higher percentage of the kids who were admitted to the class did submit test scores. And I just urge you to kind of correlation does not equal causation. So it doesn't mean that these schools prefer test scores, but it does, we can't draw that conclusion. But what we do know is that kids who submit 10 test scores may have a higher probability of getting in. But that could also be because if you submit your test score, you probably did well on your test, which means that there's a high correlation between doing well on the SAT and having a strong transcript, right? That's why everyone looks at the SAT to begin with. So just remember, correlation does not equal causation. For the most part, these test optional schools, they'll only look at your test score if it enhances the application, and there's not a specific preference to see the test scores. Um, and then the third type of school are the schools that are test optional that invite you um, to submit your test score if you'd like to, but they're not really going to consider it. They're effectively test blind, and how it's been explained to me from several, different admissions officers from these schools is that, if you have, when you get to the very end of the process and you have a student who's sitting on the border, then at that point, they may look at your SAT score. So for the most part, they invite you. There's a place where you can submit your scores, but the scores aren't really going to be considered. And the thing with test optional is that a lot of schools are kind of piloting the program. A lot of schools are extending the pilot for another 3 years, so they're still collecting data to see if it's something that they're going to continue with. Uh, so test optional will be around for the next couple of years at least. For it seems to be a large percentage of schools. Um, okay, now the second thing we're going to talk about is how schools evaluate your test scores in relation to your application as a whole. So typically, your test scores are used in conjunction with your transcript slash GPA. So it's really seeing, are you capable to do the work of the school? Um, and really, really what this is going to do is, add a little bit of nuance to your transcript. So some of the ways to think about what admissions officers are looking for specifically, right? They're looking um, to see if your test score supports your transcript or supports a narrative that you're trying to communicate. So if, for example, you had a rocky start to high school, so your freshman sophomore year were a little rocky, but you really came into your own junior year, so you might have a relatively lower GPA, but your test score, because you kind of gotten everything together, will be higher. So a good test score will support that narrative that you had a rocky start, but you came into your own. And it will support the upward trajectory. Another thing that your test score can do is it can fill in holes or little oopsies that everyone has. So what I mean by that is, let's say, you know, you were sick while you were taking algebra 2, you missed a ton of school, and as a result you didn't do well in that class. Well, now if you get like a 750 on the math portion of your SAT, you should definitely submit that, because that kind of says, yeah, I had a one-off bad class, but look, I really am capable of math. Or, if maybe English just didn't click with you, well, if you have a great SAT score, and particularly in that section of the SAT, will say, yeah, but I'm still capable of English language. So I think, just really think, is it going to enhance? Is it going to fill any holes that might be there? Will it support the narrative that you're trying to tell, whether that's an upward trajectory or one off bad classes? And a lot of times your SAT can help out with that. Another reason, or another thing that admissions officers look for, is they look for your SAT score to validate the grades that they see on your transcript. This is particularly important for smaller schools that they may not know as well, or for schools that are less competitive. So, let's say if you're looking at two high schools, right? One high school where 90% of the kids are going to four-year colleges, and 90% of the kids are taking AP classes, and the average overall AP scores um like a 3.5 or something like that. Now compare that to a high school where only 50% of the kids go on to a four-year college, and only a small percentage of kids take AP classes. Not as many kids are taking the AP tests, and the kids who do, the average AP test score from that school is around a 2.3, 2.4. Well, if you look at the two schools, if you're an admissions officer and you see a kid coming from that more competitive school, you'll have a fair degree of confidence that if they got A's in that school, that they're going to be prepared for the rigor of the institution. However, if you're looking at a school where most of the kids don't go to college, most of the kids don't take APs and don't pass um, the exams, if they even take them. Well, if you start seeing, and I know we're talking about SATs, but if you see an AP exam score of a 3 from a student from that school, you're going to want to that's going to tell you that that student performs above average, and that you can validate the grades that he or she is getting coming out of that high school. And that can be really important for schools that are either unknown or less competitive. So again, and this is the reason why a lot of the more competitive, especially technical schools, have gone back to requiring the SATs, because having SAT scores allowed them to more have more confidence and comfort in admitting students from maybe these underrepresented and underserved schools because, they could validate math grades. So if they saw a 750 or 780 on the SAT, they knew that they could admit that student, and that student would probably be able to handle the rigor of the school, of the university, and that was something that really helped them. So again, you know, what I recommend for that is, to really understand the particular numbers of your high school, right? So every high school submits with each application a tear sheet or a high school profile. So just ask your guidance counselor for that high school profile, and that will give you an idea of what admissions officers are looking at when they're evaluating your application. And that will also give you an idea of, well, should I submit my test score? Should I not? If your test scores were maybe below the 25th to 75th percentile, or effectively below the 25th percentile, um, and you're from a competitive high school, maybe you don't need to submit. However, if you had relatively low, um, below that 25th percentile, but you're from a non-competitive high school, then you may want to submit those scores, just because it will validate your grades and give the admissions officers a little bit more comfort and understanding of where you are academically, and using it in conjunction with your transcript. Um, and I think I just kind of think about those things. The other thing to think about, they're always looking to see if you can do the work, and they're using that in conjunction with your transcript. One thing to keep in mind is that, if you even if you're below that 25th percentile, when you start looking at competitive schools where, the average SAT score is like a 1550, and if you're sitting at a 1510, do you submit the test score? Well, probably, especially if it's a technical school and your math score is high. Yeah, because you want to, layer in that you're competitive in math in every way possible. So again, just keep that in mind. Overall, I would highly suggest that students do two things. Number one, get your school profile from your guidance counselor. Just ask to look at it, just so that you have an understanding of the context that admissions officers are looking at for you. And then, number two, really, if you're if you're sitting on the fence, if you don't know whether to submit or not, then have a conversation with an admissions officer, because ultimately these guys, they're all good people. They all want to help you, right? Like, you don't go into admissions if you don't really care about kids. So they'll help you, and if and just ask them if it's a good idea to submit or not, or how they use the test scores when they evaluate. Go ahead and have a conversation with them, and they'll probably help you out. So if you have any other questions about test optional policies or anything to do with admissions, feel free to contact Vision Admissions below. We'd be happy to talk to you. Thanks.